Hello, Foxy listeners. Welcome to the show today. I love it when you jump on a call with somebody that we've had on the show before, and that is my guest today. Aurora has been on the show. I cannot believe it's been this long, but way back in July of 2021, when she came on to talk about her Turn Words into Wealth. If you're not watching the video, I am holding the book, which is very dog-eared pages and highlighted. I have read it quite a few times. Aurora, thank you for coming back on the show.
Oh, I love to see a dog-eared book with yellow
Right?
highlights. That's
Look at all my
fantastic.
highlights in here.
I
It's
love
just,
it.
yeah.
Well,
Like,
that is awesome.
I'm Tanya Fox, and you're listening to Fox Talks Business Podcast. I started my career in the corporate world, but always played to my own tune and loved to think outside of the box. This didn't always serve me well with the bosses, so I made the decision to become an entrepreneur. And that little seed of entrepreneurial curiosity continued to grow as I branched out into retail, service, and franchise businesses. Now, I have been fortunate to have amazing successes in the last 2 decades, but they did not come without some really big failures and even bigger lessons learned. And that's why I started this podcast, not just to share the failures, but to show you how you can turn every failure into a success. We're going to hear from some amazing humans from around the world that are going to share their stories of the good, the bad, and the motivational entrepreneurial life has to offer. After all, life is too short to make all of the mistakes yourself, so why not learn from each other? And of course, we're going to have some fun, because as I always say, well, you know what? I'll tell you that at the end of the episode.
for those that, maybe missed that episode or just tuned into later, tell us a little bit about you before we get diving into rabbit holes here.
All right. Well, I'm a serial entrepreneur. In fact, I really wanted to encourage the listeners by talking about the magic of pivoting every decade. Before, coming on to this call with you, I looked at my life. I'm like, shit, I have pivoted every decade. I launched my first business in my 20s, sold it in my 20s, launched my second business in my 20s, sold it, launched a third business, a fourth business, wrote nonfiction books, took my MBA in Italy when I turned 50. And now I'm finally writing fantasy for something else new, Magic, Mystery, and the Multiverse, which is the first book in a fantasy trilogy. And it's my first novel. I've written maybe 6 or so nonfiction books. I'm a ghostwriter, serial entrepreneur, but I've always wanted to write fantasy. And I had to get over this thought, it's too late, I'm too old, I should stick to my knitting. And I had so much joy doing something new. And so I really want to encourage everybody, whatever your limiting belief is, it's not too late. Life is long. Life is kind of like a multiverse. You can stay stuck in one chapter and have Groundhog Day, or you can decide to explore, and then life can just open up like a multiverse.
Well, and I love this because I think it's such a key point, because I think we get stuck. We were talking about this a little bit off air, that my only child is graduating this year and is getting this question that just like, it's like nails down a chalkboard to me of like, so like, what are your plans? What are you going to be when you grow up? And I'm like, his mother can't even answer that damn question. Like, stop asking him. But I think this is something that, especially as entrepreneurs, we feel like, well, but I started this thing,
Yeah.
regardless of what it is, I kind of started this thing. Or like you had said, well, I can't do that, right? Like, how can I write a book now? And to me, I always think it's like parenting. Like, I look back on it and I go, God, like I see kids that are like 20 years old, and I had my son when I was 30, and I don't think I would have coped the same way in my 20s that I did in my 30s. And, even in the book that I wrote, I thought, if I would have written that, even like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it wouldn't have been the same thing. Definitely. Do you feel the same way that, as you kind of start new projects, that you're like, this would have been completely different had I have done this?
Well, I always wanted to be a writer, even when I was 9. But honestly, the older you get, the more you have to share, because
Right.
you've got experience, you've got wisdom, you've read other books that you loved or that you hated. And especially a book like yours, how to collaborate. I mean, you couldn't have written that the same way in
No.
your 20s. There's no way. And by the way, big shout out, if you haven't already read How to Collaborate by the wonderful, the amazing Tanya Fox, jump on to Amazon, grab yourself a copy, and leave a review, because that's part of being a collaborator.
Well, I'm gonna have to like just cut that part out and just keep playing that.
There you
Thank you
go.
for that.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned about what are you going to do when you grow up
Yeah.
question. Let's not ask ourselves or others that question. It's better to ask the question like, what am I curious about?
Mm-hmm.
What am I interested in? What sparks joy? What do I feel drawn towards? What am I even a little bit scared of? Because there's no growth in the comfort zone. If you always stay playing in the comfort zone, you kind of shrink. I think we
Mm-hmm.
all shrink if we just stay playing safe. Like I was terrified to go to Italy and get my MBA. I'm like, I just turned 50. What am I friggin' thinking? And
But
and
let's add a new country onto the top of that with a different language.
But what a great experience. And it did two things. It confirmed I already knew a lot about business, but then I had like, okay, I've got the MBA. This is as good as it gets. If you're not happy with my qualifications, then I'm not the person for you.
Yeah.
And that little niggling perfectionist part of me that always wants to learn more, do more, be better, got satisfied. And I think that it was not in my comfort zone. And that was part of the blessing of it. And so like now I've always wanted to write a fantasy book since I was 9, and I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. I love the Narnia series. I actually even remember 9 years old being on my little tippy toes, reaching up to get the last book in the Narnia series, which is called The Last Battle. And as I touched that book, I remember the feeling of anticipatory grief because it was the last book in the series, as well as anticipation because I hadn't read the book and I was excited. And in that moment, I realized that writers are like wizards with just little black dots of ink on ivory paper. They can transport us to another place in time. They can give us emotions. And I'm like, I want to be that kind of wizard. That sounded very cool. But then I was practical in my whole life, right? When I went to university, I wanted to take English. My father said, no, you need a job. So I took economics instead. I had businesses, I got my MBA, and then COVID hit. And I'm like, if not now, when? Am I going to keep on putting off writing this fantasy trilogy that's in my heart because it's not sensible, practical, and I'm scared and I've never, published fantasy. I don't friggin' know. I know how to do a nonfiction book. I'm a ghostwriter. I love helping people publish their nonfiction books. But that was exactly why to lean into it. And it's given me so much joy. It won the American Fiction Awards, Best Preteen Book. It won a Reader's Choice Award, Best Teen Books, won, I don't know, half a dozen other book awards. And I'm having so much fun writing book 2, writing book 3. Then when I launch them on Kickstarter, I'm scared to do that too. But I am living my message of it's not too late. It's never too late. And lean into what's interesting, what's challenging, what's outside your comfort zone, because that's where the juice is. That's where the joy is. That's where we get to rejuvenate and become younger instead of getting crotchety and old and stuck in our ways.
Just sitting in that chair, knitting away.
Rocking back and forth with the TV remote control.
Well, and I think this is like something that everybody needs to hear because I think there's two things. I always say, like, well, what do you want to try now? Like it's never like, what do you want to be but like, what do you want to try now? Like try everything. Why not? And then, the second thing is that I think a lot of times when people hear the word pivot, they think of like a complete 180. Like they have to go, like pivoting means you have to go in completely the opposite direction and to give up everything that you're doing right now and try something completely new when a pivot can be something as simple as fiction, nonfiction to fiction, which is a huge pivot in and of itself. But you don't have to completely reinvent everything that you've done or all of the experiences you've led up to this point.
No, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We can maybe invent a different word besides pivoting. Tanya, launching to the next level, opening a new chapter, how about, or a new book in the series that is your life. I mean, certainly all the skills and expertise that I gained over, I don't know, a decade or so helping people publish their books, how to market a book, how to edit a book, how to publish a book, how to test titles, how to test covers, like all of that stuff is useful, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. But the structure of a fiction book or a fantasy series and a series on top of it is like completely different. But I think I did fairly good job because BBC expressed interest in a 12-part series. And I'm in Los Angeles at the moment, drumming up interest for turning it into a TV series. I don't know if you and your family like to watch like the new Percy Jackson series, Harry Potter, the Hogwarts series, apparently going to be 10-year series on Max. So just because you've got the book and the ebook and the hardcover book, and in J.K. Rowling's case, universal rides and wands and all kinds of merchandise, you're not necessarily done. And that relates to the book that you just showed, the Turn Words into Wealth book, which shows 7 different ways to make 7 figures with your $1 million message. So a decade or so ago, when I started helping other people publish their books, I love helping people get their message distilled and get it onto paper and get it into a beautiful book. But most people were missing, how do they monetize? Like, you're a businesswoman, so you know that a book can be a lead magnet and that it can generate business. But so many people were missing that essential step, which is just made me, heartbroken, because then they would kind of give up on their book and stop talking about it and stop marketing it. So I really wanted people to know 7 different models for monetizing a book and turning it into 7 figures. And one of those is the one that I just talked about, movies and merchandising, which applies better to fiction than nonfiction in the case of Percy Jackson and Hogwarts, for example. But there's 6 other ways that really usually work better for nonfiction. So for example, with you and your book, Tanya, the How to Collaborate book, like, speaking makes the most sense.
Yeah.
You're already a great speaker, you're already an expert, you've already got a podcast, and so people are going to hire you to speak. And I've had some of my clients, once they had their book and their message down, their speaking fees increased to $35,000 a pop, which is not bad.
Well, and to me, that was like the amazing fact, right? They're like, oh, you're probably really expensive. I'm like, I'm the same price that I was before the book came out. It's just, unless you want the book there. But I mean, I was also very confident in what it was that I charged, but it was one of the reasons to write the book, that I was like, look, I mean, I've spoke on stage, but it was a lot easier to just have that, to be able to say speaker, podcaster, author. And then people are like, oh, and I'm like, it's the same freaking message. But it was one of those things where it was like, okay, well, you need to kind of have this underneath your belt. Okay, let's go like this. And I always wanted to say, I've always wanted to write a book. I've always wanted to have something on the shelf that had my name on it, that I could be like, I have achieved this goal. I always thought it was going to be like a kid's book or a children's book, or like, who knew it was going to be this?
Well, maybe the book is down the road, but it's really the trifecta.
Yeah.
What you've got now, the book, the podcast, and speaking, or it could be the book, a YouTube channel, or a TED Talk and speaking. So to have your content available, in print, in audio and video, and then live, that's the cha-ching ching. So whether it's David Goggins, who was told if he went with a big publisher that he'd be lucky if he sold 5,000 copies, but then he went on a bunch of podcasts. I think he did over 1,000 podcasts, something insane like that, in about a year. But he's a maniac, and he sold 1 million copies of his books and 600,000 copies of the audiobook. And because he had self-published or independently published, versus if he had gone with a New York Times publisher, I think the difference would have been approximately $20 million in his pocket. Thereabouts. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of independent publishing. Why give away the control, especially if you already have a business or you like marketing? And so that's what Turn Words into Wealth, Blueprint for Your Business Brand and Book, is about. And then Magic, Mystery, and the Multiverse, like answering the question you had for your son. I thought to myself, when after COVID hit, I'm like, well, if not now, when? I'm like, well, Aurora, stop talking about writing that fantasy series that you say you want to write, and do it. No more excuses, because COVID made me remember again that we don't have forever.
Yeah.
Memento mori. Like, you may recall, Tanya, my husband died when he was only 33.
Yes, I remember that.
My son was 4. So that certainly reminded me, but we forget, right?
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, what do I really care about? So my background's in film and television. I used to be head of development for Canada's largest film and television production company. I worked in LA as a vice president of live action television for a company called Porchlight Entertainment. I launched a film and television production company and raised $5 million to do that and made 8 films. So I have a big background in film and television. So I wanted a book that could be turned into a TV series or movies that was really fast, lots of action. You know, it's kind of Harry Potter meets Doctor Who meets Percy Jackson, that sort of fun young adult or late middle grade reading. I think it's the kind of books I like to read.
Yeah.
Not dystopian, like fun. But then I also thought, well, how can I make this more about what really matters to me? As a child, I suffered from asthma and several times had to be rushed to the hospital, turning blue because I just couldn't breathe. So something about oxygen that really matters to me. Now, I think most people take oxygen for granted.
Yeah.
But I wanted to have a theme about taking care of Mother Earth in the book, and I wanted to dramatize the value of oxygen. I mean, you can survive 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without air. So I want to dramatize that. And then the other thing that really matters to me, well, a couple of other things that really matter to me, but one thing that really matters to me is free speech. And I felt down that we have this cancel culture that's not willing to let people speak up, that we expect them to, come to the same conclusion that we have with their first utterance. And my experience is that's not how people figure things out. Like how we figure things out is by talking it out, by sharing, by bouncing it back and forth, the Socratic method. And then I just felt like this is a terribly wrong way for humanity to go, to be so hyper vigilant that the other person might be misspeaking, that we shut down our ability to communicate or brainstorm or discuss or debate. So it also has a theme about free speech. So the evil people are censors, like censorship kind of thing. And then a couple other things I care about is I loved reading books as a kid. It changed my life. And so I want to encourage kids to read, to write, creative self-expression. So I put all of those things that I really care about into this fun, entertaining package called Magic, Mystery, and the Multiverse.
Well, and I love that, I think with every author that I've encountered who has written a book, there always is something deeper in it that sometimes a lot of people might not catch on to, right? Yes. And some of that is, I mean, I remember even doing that with my own, is like there was some stories that made it and some stories that didn't, in retelling some things. And it was interesting to sort of, I felt like, go through that process of, for me, even if the book never would have been published, just going through that writing and that catharsis of getting stuff out and being like, wow, I really have gone through a lot. Like I've done some pretty cool shit. And it wasn't until I had to kind of do that deep dive to go, okay, like I need to check facts, I need to check dates, like all this other stuff, and pulling like old notebooks out that I was like, I don't even remember doing this stuff. Like, how do I not remember that? And I think so often we forget about that. And to me, I've been like encouraging so many people of like, write your story down. And they're like, but I don't want to publish. It's not about publishing. It's just about, even if nobody sees it, even if just like years down the road, you pull it out and go, oh my God, I can't believe, that's how I was feeling, or that's what I was thinking, or that's how much hope I had.
The unexamined life is not worth living. Who said that? I got to look that up.
Yeah.
But basically, you're so right. Like there's so much value in writing a book or creating a TED Talk or really getting your message down for a pitch to raise capital, because you're struggling with, what is it I really want to say? What is the essence of what I want to say? What is the story that shows the struggle or the pain of not having the solution? What is a good story that shows the result of after I learned how to collaborate, for example, how to collaborate? And so it feels like most people's lives are like a gold mine that they haven't mined.
Yeah.
There's gold and then there are hills, but there's also ore and there's some silver and there's some crap. As we write or fight to speak it, we get more clear. We pull out the gold vein. And then a book, hopefully, is mostly that vein of gold that you've distilled the essence of what you want to share. And then once you've got your book and you've gotten really clear what you want to share, then it's so much easier, to speak about it or have a podcast about it or do a TED Talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
The most valuable thing we can share with others is our humanity, our struggles, and our breakthroughs. Because we're all human. We all have struggles. They might be slightly different shades, but as we are willing to discover what really worked for us, what blocked us, and what were the breakthroughs, and we share that with others, it helps them have epiphanies. Like I've had people just from hearing me share some stories go, I can do that. Or, I never thought of it that way. And now I feel freed from that heavy weight of I can't do that, or I can't forgive that, or I'll never get over that grief, or I'll never be able to write my book, or whatever the thing is. I'm sure you've had that experience as well, Tanya, that when you share on this podcast or in other ways that other people can shift.
Yeah. I think for me, like what I was going to say too is for me, one of the biggest things and I'm not saying to wait, but one of the things that I noticed in waiting, until I was in my mid 40s to write this book is I was a lot stronger in my convictions of being told, no,
Right.
no, write all of the big companies that you worked with. And I was, I really like planted my feet on the ground and was like, no, that's not what I'm writing this book for. I'm writing this book because I want somebody who's struggling to be and has like $5 in the bank, to be able to pick this book up and go, okay, how do I get myself out of this? How do I help my community? How do I figure this out without a lot behind me? I don't want to give them the fantasy of like, oh yeah, you're going to read this book and at the end you're going to be able to do a collaboration with, this giant company. It's just reality is not there for shit like that. And so, but there was a lot of pressure that I felt in sort of in being sort of coaxed in a different direction and going, no, it's going to sell, more copies if you write it this way, or if you talk about this particular thing. And I think it took a lot for me to kind of just go, no, that's not what I want this to be about. Like maybe book 2 can be about that.
See how useful it was for you to push back and go,
Yeah.
no, that's not what this book is about. That's not what I'm a stand for. Like my first published book, From Heartbreak to Happiness, is an intimate diary of healing after my husband. And I struggled so much. I think if you're not struggling with your book, you're not being honest enough.
Yeah.
And I struggled because like you, slightly different, but I wanted it to be a gift for other people who were really devastated by grief. And so if I airbrushed it, if I cleaned it up, so to speak, then they could read the book and go, well, I can't even grieve, right? I might as well off myself now.
Yeah.
No, I wanted them to go, if anything, gosh, she's whining. I'm doing better than she is. I'm recovering better.
There's a reason we all watch Hoarders when we're needing to clean the house and go, well, I mean, it could be worse.
It could be worse. Yeah, exactly. So, and writing is easy. You just have to bleed on the page.
I love that.
I forget who said that. Maybe it was Stephen King or something like that. But there is truth that when you're really reaching deep into yourself for the goal or the truth of the breakthroughs or the things in your heart that you really want to share, it will touch you. Like I remember when I read my own writing, if I have an emotional reaction, if I start crying or I get angry or I'm like, not with the writing, but feeling like swept up in the story, that I've got something. If it's too academic, I mean, that's another thing that I covered in Turn Words into Wealth is the neuroscience of communication. So most people have the illusion that if they, verbally send somebody an Excel spreadsheet, that person will open the Excel spreadsheet that they just received verbally and will process it. And that's not how we process information. So it's very useful to know the hacks for communication, little hacks like myth busting, for example. So I did a myth bust earlier in our call, which you probably didn't even notice, or the listeners probably didn't even notice. The myth is it's too late. The fact is it's never too late. That's a little myth bust, and that's a communication hack. So it's a little soundbite that's good for media. And it also focuses me on, well, what exactly is the myth that I want to bust here, right? So myth bust, very useful technique. You know, you may have some great myth busts, which I want to hear in a second, but I'll give you a minute to think about it. About collaboration. You know, the myth is something about collaboration, the fact is. But, you know, my background in film and television, the hero's journey, this is a common structure that you see in Star Wars or Harry Potter. It's like climactic or crisis event, struggle, 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 and then some kind of turning point, and then things got better. So whatever your message is probably around that turning point. So for you, Tanya, it might be, I'm going to make this up because I haven't read your book. I would like to read your book. I just noticed that you had it today, which is a great accomplishment.
We'll send you a copy.
The last time I was on, you were thinking about writing a book, but you know, the struggle, it might be you or somebody else struggling in business. I tried this, I tried that, I tried this. None of these things worked. It got worse. And then I collaborated. And that was the breakthrough. So if you reverse engineer the story and you know that your turning point is around your core message, which is collaboration, then you will tell all of the stories or multiple stories, many stories, and all have that collaboration, your stories, your client stories, etc. So that's another communication hack. And that fits how people actually receive stories. We are hungry for meaning.
Yeah.
And stories are how human beings understand meaning. And I got to share this thing. I come from an academic background, and this really struck me. Like, you cannot decide what to do with facts. No matter how many facts you have, it won't give you the answer until you filter it through what matters to you. What are you trying to do? What is meaningful? Then the facts can be helpful.
Yeah.
So we often make the mistake of giving people too many facts and not enough meaning.
Which is true, because I think we think, oh, well, if I'm very factual about this, if I come from it from an intellectual standpoint, it's going to make more sense. And I know I did that with a lot of my clients for the longest time. Because that was the world that I kind of came from in accounting, where it was just the facts. And when I started to switch that narrative and start to tell it in stories, two things happened. One, people's eyes didn't glaze over.
It's always good.
Which so often happens. But I think the other thing is that it was easier to connect with them. It was easier to get people to understand when it was in a story, because I think people could pull their own interpretation out of it themselves.
Yeah.
And I had to do a lot less work that way, because they would make that story make sense to whatever was going on in their life. I didn't need to know anything about it. And I always thought that to me, that's always been the intrigue of fiction and of books and of just reading, is that I will pull out different things. It's one of the reasons why I dog ear and highlight pages, because every now and then I will go back to books and then I'll be like, I wonder where was I at that was such a pivotal thing, you know? And so now I write in the margins, like, this is what I'm thinking. This is why this means something to me, because it's always interesting for me that I go, wow, like, I'm reading those words now and like, I get it. It makes a lot of sense, but why was it so pivotal that I highlighted it and underlined it? Like, where was I at in that stage of my life, or what was going on that just resounded with me? And it's why I always say to people, never just read a book once, because you'll always, get something else out of it the next time you read it, especially if you're at a different point.
Yeah, because you're kind of a different person. Well, I love it that you highlighted and dog-eared and yellow marked, turn words into wealth. And that's what I hope it to be, a resource for people. And I encourage people to do that with every book.
Yeah.
If you're just skimming it, it won't have as much value as if you highlight and dog-ear the pages. And then if you really want to have maximized value, teach something that you learned in that book to somebody else. And that will really help you remember it even more so. The other thing about facts that most people don't realize, the neuroscience of communication again, is that when we talk facts, we trigger the other person's cerebral cortex, which triggers their analyst brain. And if there is a brain you do not want to sell to, it is the analyst brain. If you're in a sales call and you find yourself vomiting facts, you have just sabotaged the sale. Instead, take a step back, choose one fact, or better yet, one story, and share that, or even better, zip it and ask them, what are their goals? What are their challenges? Well, if they had a magic wand, what would they like to see a year from now? Ask questions. And that'll create a much more engaged conversation than too many facts.
Well, and I think that's so true with anything,
Yeah.
even when you're, and I write about that in collaboration. Like in my book, I say that too, like always ask, because what you think, and this was an interesting thing when I was writing the book, I wrote to people that either had been clients of mine or that I had worked with and said, what do you have, like, could you share with me like a memory you have of me, or like, what is it that stood out? What made you work with me? Whatever it was, made sense to where they were. And there was not one answer I got back that I wasn't like, huh, really? Like, I was
Why?
really, really surprised by this exercise. And I got it out of a book that somebody was like, try this and see what people say. Because what I found oftentimes, and I, would say your superpower is what's the easiest thing to you. And so
Right.
there would be so often that I'd be like, no, it needs, like in life and when I was pivoting in business and trying different things, I'd be like, I can't charge for that. Like, it's so easy, right? Like it
If it's
feels
your
like a sin.
superpower.
But that was always my superpower. And for me, I just felt like it was a good lesson to kind of like be open to those, those things, and ask those questions of people of, like you were saying, like, what is it that you're looking for? What do you want? Because I think a lot of times the best help we can ever give anybody that you're working with is allowing them the space to figure out their own shit, which people will often do. I do it with my coach all the time. Like, she's like, in the 2 years we've worked together, she's like, I want you to know I've never solved one of your problems. And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, if you go back through all of our stuff, you will literally talk yourself through the whole like therapy session almost. And then you find your own answer, and then you go, oh my God, thank you so much. That was amazing. She's like, it's all you. Like, and I was like, okay, but let's just keep doing that and pretending it's you. But I think
there's a myth bust there, right?
a myth bust, yeah, that you can't figure but to me, I need that other person to sound it off of, right?
That's
to
what I
sort of
was
talk
saying.
through the whole thing.
We figure things out by speaking it aloud, which is
Yeah.
why I hate the cancel culture, because it robs us of that opportunity to figure things out by bouncing it back and forth with another person.
Yeah.
So the myth bust with that would be like, the myth is your coach needs to solve your problems to be valuable. The fact is, you need to solve your problems for your coach to be valuable.
Yeah. Which is true. Like,
It's
hey,
true.
I do coaching. So I have a lot of people who are like, that doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, I know it is guided a little bit. But the truth of the fact is that you do, this comes from my mom. Like, she would always say to me, you have all of the answers. You're just standing in your own way. So find somebody who can help you to get out of your way. And then all of a sudden, like, there it is. She's like, it's really hard when you're standing, with your nose touching a boulder to go, I'm never going to get out of this. But if you take 3 steps back, you realize it's just a rock on the road and you can walk around it. Sometimes you just need that person to go, just back up.
Your mom sounds like my mom. She was very much into the Socratic method, and that worked for Socrates to get famous. Just
Yeah.
asking. All right, so I'm really curious. So, of the stories from your happy clients who were thrilled with you, what was one story that surprised you or that stood out when you asked them what it was that was most valuable about working with you? And then they gave a reply that you're like, oh, didn't know that.
I think the one that kept popping out was putting things into simplicity. And because I remember having to go back and like jumping on calls with them and going, explaining this to me. And they would like, I would be in a place where I just felt like I couldn't get out of the hole. And you would reword it to me, and it would make it just seem so much easy. Like, you just kind of took all of the muck away. And a lot of that was based around like humor or stories. And I'll never forget the one who said, I was really trapped in feeling like I wasn't professional, and like, so I couldn't charge what I wanted to. And I said, oh, I remember this. Like, this was a 6-month process with this one client. And she says, yeah. And I said, like, so was it all of our coaching? Like, and she goes, no, it was one call that I'll never forget, where you said, The difference between an amateur and a professional is simply being paid. So a prostitute who gets paid is technically a professional. So explain to me why you can't be a professional. And I was like, the first thought that went through my head is, I can't believe that shit came out of my mouth. But she was like, literally, she's like, shows me a sticky note. And she was like, a prostitute is a professional. So are you. And she was like, it's on my wall. And I was just like, that is
Wow.
not the thing that I wanted to be remembered for. But for me, it was like, for her, it was just like she said, it was this
just what she needed
simplicity.
to hear.
It was just what she needed to hear. It got her out of her own head to go, I am thinking too deep on this subject. Like it really can be this simple. And so for me, that was the most surprising thing, because I really thought it would have been like templates or lessons or like different things that I sent them. And it was really like most of the stuff that came back was the way you think and the way you regurgitated information to me helped me to sort of see it in a different, light. And I was like, they wouldn't have been something I would have picked. It wouldn't have been something I thought about. Now I hone into that a little bit more. I listen to my stories a little bit more. I ask, have I said any like weird lines that you remember? And I collect them down, going, weird stuff has come out of my mouth. Like a prostitute is a professional. Like what t-shirt slogans have come out of my mouth that I need to remember?
Well, I love this story, and it reminds me of a book called Significant Objects. And in this book, they wanted to experiment. They ran an experiment and to test what is the value of a story to create more value or less value for an item that's being sold. The items were not that expensive, but they were on eBay, and it was a transparent experiment. They said at the bottom, we are testing this, and they weren't pulling anybody. They weren't lying. But the stories were not all positive. There were some negative stories. There were some professionally written stories, amateur written, like there were a variety of stories, and there were 100 different objects on eBay. So for example, of a story, it might be somebody's selling oven mitts and they have a memory of their grandmother cooking chocolate chip cookies and the smell, and they come home from school and they have the cookies. But others were like fantasy stories that were like involving ghosts and that were like kind of icky. And they tested to see, then they also sold the exact same object on eBay without a story. And you might remember from, maybe I shared this the last time I spoke with you in 2021, a long time ago, but the result was shocking. When I was researching the book, Turn Words into Wealth, I found this story, and it's like the value increased 27-fold. So we love meaning. So even if the story is a prostitute is a professional, you added probably 27 times more value because it stuck, it landed. Yeah. And you created meaning. But for all of us, if we are just leading with a picture of the object and the price, we are potentially missing 27 times the value. So it's shocking.
Yeah.
Of course, the more expensive the item, perhaps you'll add 100,000 to a house, but not, sell it for 27 million instead of 1 million. But if you're selling pot mitts for $5, who knows? It could be a lot more.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to kind of keep those, those things up. I mean, my, behind my computer where I record is like sticky notes of a bunch of different stuff that, get changed out. But one that's been on there for years is a quote. I don't even know. Yeah, I didn't even write down who it was from, but it said, there will always be somebody who cannot see your worth. Don't let that person be you. And
ooh, I love that.
That's one that's always stuck with me, especially as I was starting to grow in business, and, and then I was like, as soon as you grow, then people are like, let me tell you what's wrong with this person. And I was getting stuck in that negativity thing where I was like, this is really bothering me. Like I want to come out with gloves on, and I know I can't do that. And I'll just get myself into more talk about cancel culture. Like I was like, I'll be burned at the stake. I used to tell my husband, there's two ways things can go with me. Either there's balloons in a parade, or there's pitchforks in a parade. Either way, I'm getting a parade.
Either way, we're getting a parade.
But I think, when we were talking about pivoting and writing and just doing something, I think to me that was like such a pivotal thing, because it made me take a moment to take a step back and go, there is no point in my life where I've ever been too young or too old to do something. that I wanted to do as I became an adult. Okay. I know
And
somebody's
yet,
going to be like, well, you couldn't vote when you were 7. Well, I didn't want to vote when I was 7. But once I became an adult, I wish that that would have been a lesson that I would have learned a lot easier of just do the thing, just try the thing. And
yeah,
if it doesn't work, pivot and do something else and then do something else. Cause I naturally, and it sounds like you too, naturally did that anyway. As something
yeah.
didn't work. And I was like, I do not want to go get a 9 to 5 job. So let's pivot and figure something else out.
And I always feel like I'm guided, but sometimes when I'm pivoting, I have one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake. I confess.
Yeah.
I don't always pivot with as much grace as I would like to, but it usually is always like there'll be a message. Somebody will say, well, for example, when I pivoted from coach training to helping people with their marketing and messaging in their books, people would come to me saying, coach training is great. Now I've done the coach training. But how do you get on radio? How do you get on TV? How did you write so many books? Can you help me do that? And after enough people kept asking for that, I'm like, I guess I could do that next, right? So, but let's hear about your pivot. You're planning a pivot for this podcast to lean more into your message about collaboration from what you said before we started recording. Do you want to share anything about pivoting? Because I'm all about, can we encourage people to
Yeah.
lean in a new chapter and to embrace it and to enjoy being outside of their comfort zone, because that's where the growth is. That's
Yeah.
where the magic happens.
Well, and I think for me, it was coming to ask questions more often of like reaching out to, those people who are engaged with me, who listen to the podcast all the time and just saying like, who do you want to hear? And asking those questions and actually listening to them when they talk back, that was a key thing. But for me, that's really where this came from, is that I thought that what I was doing, offering a lot more interviews, diving into, topics all over the place, was what everybody wanted.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I sat down and went, easier thing would be, instead of, putting all of this stuff out, waiting for the analytics to come back, analyzing, would be just to friggin' ask those that are actually tuning in, what would you like? Right? Like, I'm like, I don't know why this lesson is so hard. So we actually did that. And then what came, people were like, we want to hear about you. We want to hear about like your ideas and the stuff you think about and how you figure all of this stuff out and deal with collaborations. And I was like, oh, well, like I wrote this in a book. And they're like, yeah, but it's more fun to hear it from you. And I was like, oh, wow, I should have asked that a while ago. That's really easy to do.
You can take one chapter from the book and make that kind of the focus conversation for each podcast for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and I think for me, it was just like, yeah, okay, people want this tangible thing. They want, they want the comparisons. They want to see like, how can I think differently, about these things? And that was my biggest thing, is I realize it's easy for me to see two large companies like, BMW and Louis Vuitton, like create this really cool collaboration. And then people to go, great, but I'm not BMW, nor am I Louis Vuitton. So what the hell am I going to do with this information?
So how can I implement this?
And so for me, it was like, that's where I find that the small business owner, that's where I was, that I was really struggling. And I forgot about that, of going, how hard that was at the beginning to go, how do I tear this whole thing down to make it make sense for a pen and a piece of paper, to kind of work together, but using the same synopsis that these big companies were using. And so that's what people want to hear, I guess.
Well, you're really clear on who is your ideal reader,
Yeah.
or who is the ideal person that you want to serve with this podcast. So that was really cool. And it's interesting that I just suggested that you do the podcast after. At Same Page Publishing, we do it the other way around. So I interview experts, for example, Lois Sonstagard, whose book is coming out in March, called Start with Collaboration.
Yes.
Could be a good guest for you. How we created that book is, first we decided what the book was going to be about and each chapter was going to be about. Then I created a bunch of interview questions, and then I interviewed her on a podcast and then transcribed that. And that became the messy first draft, which then, got all polished up. But the result is, when you create a book by doing it that way, you're comfortable talking about it because you've already talked about it.
Yeah.
And then when we launch the book, we've already got like a dozen podcast episodes, which could be hundreds of pieces of social media to promote the book. But it's interesting, my shift into fantasy or fiction, and my background's in film and TV, so I did drama. But this book I did for a client, Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer, Michael Stockham. It's got over 2,000 reviews on Amazon, and it's sold 50,000 copies. And I really thought that Same Page Publishing, which is the company I founded to help people create books worth talking about, I really thought it would only be nonfiction. But he came to me and he's like, no, I want to write, a legal thriller. He's a lawyer. I'm like, okay, sure, let's do that. And then as we worked on it, I'm like, oh, let's structure it like a movie so let it become a movie. So we did that, and people really like the book. And now we're working on 9 more legal thrillers called the Jake Fox series. They're going to come out later. The first one, Ties That Blind, will come out in summer 2024, and hopefully the second book in that series will come out Christmas time 2024. Anyway, we're working on 9, so that's quite fun.
Why not? I love that.
It is interesting how like working with my clients also leads me, and like, well, if I can help my clients write, fiction that gets thousands of reviews and sells thousands of copies, why don't I, do it? So that's my magic mystery in the multiverse, which, by the way, I also like doing new marketing things. I'm going to launch on Kickstarter book 2.
Yeah, so I want you to talk to us about that, because I was following it and on the website too. So shameless plug away, please.
Shameless plug away. So if people are interested in fantasy for young adults, epic fantasy, or you're looking for a book to give your 10, 11, 12-year-old that's something you can feel good about them reading, fun action adventure, but nothing too dystopian and nothing sultry, not to just say it's not Twilight Saga.
Gotcha.
That a parent or grandparent or aunt and uncle would feel comfortable giving to their kid to read. If you go to magicmysteryandthemultiverse.com, you can read the reviews. It's won Reader's Choice Award, Best Book for Teens, American Fiction Award, Best Preteen Book, Literary Titan Award, Pinnacle Book Award, Outstanding Creator Award, a bunch of awards. I just applied for the Governor General's Award yesterday, so fingers crossed on that. And you can find the book on Amazon there, but there's also a link to the Kickstarter. So I'd love for people to follow the Kickstarter. Trying to get 100 people following. There's no cost, there's no obligation, just follow on Kickstarter, and then you can see my book launch. So I went to a conference in November called 20 Books, which is all about the idea that once you have 20 books as an author, you can quit your day job, which I did before 20 books, but I also help, authors with their books. And one of the things that stood out to me is creative marketing is so key, even as an author. You know this from your business, Tanya, that marketing is really key, which is one of the reasons you wrote your book. But 80% of books are sold on Amazon, but the margins on Amazon are not very good, except for Amazon. So what really stood out to me is that a lot of authors who are making 6 or even 7 figures or more launch their books first on Kickstarter. And by doing so, they're able to create a relationship with their fans and readers, and they're able to offer things that you can't offer through Amazon or Ingram or your regular bookstore. So nice, beautifully printed books, bookmarks, graphic arts. Like I have the cover designer. It's an award-winning book cover. This book cover is award-winning. And he made 2 more covers for me, but I'm also having him do art for all of the characters. So I've got full color art of all the characters. So people can offer extra things like the digital art, maps. Sometimes if people want a really lovely hardcover book with a ribbon and gold leaf and this and that. Anyway, Kickstarter allows authors to create beautiful books and offer different things, such as maybe training, or even some authors have offered, come to my cabin and spend the weekend with me and my wife. So Kickstarter is really fun. So if you're at all interested in marketing, or you're interested in fantasy books, I'd love it if you and your audience would follow the Kickstarter. And again, they can find that on mysteryandthemultiverse.com. No cost or obligation to follow, but then you'll get to see what the heck I'm doing.
Yes. Well, we'll make sure we have all of the links to where everybody could go. I've got it up on my screen right now, and I'm going to definitely sign in and follow that. Because I'm excited to read this too. Because like I said, I did read Turn Your Words into Wealth, dog-eared, highlighted. I've read it about 3 or 4 times. I always go back to it. And loan it out too. I loan my books out with all of the marks in it and encourage marks back. I just say use a different color highlighter, but I'm always really curious, what did they like the same things I like? Did they find new stuff? So
it makes it look more valuable.
I think it's so interesting, and depending on who I loan it to, it's interesting to sort of see what they gleamed onto. Now, getting people to do this is like pulling teeth, because there are those people who are like, that's ruining a book. And I'm like, but I'm requesting it. I bought it. I own it. It's okay. Not a library book. Mark the goddamn sucker up.
That's true. We have this whole thing about books. I respect books, but I like marking up books.
Oh, you know what? It's so funny whenever I go to anybody's house, and if I'm fortunate enough, or sometimes I just ask, if they have like a library, even if it's just one bookshelf, and I go, can I look around? I will go for the roughest looking book, and that'll be can I borrow this? And they're like, why do you want to borrow that one? And I'm like, because this has been loved a lot. And I want to know what, like, the spine's broken. I'm like, this has been read more than once. That's the one that I want. The one that looks like it's been through a war. There's some good stories, and
I'm like you. The libraries in people's homes are like magnets to me. I had a date at somebody's home. I'm dating. Talk about doing something.
There's a pivot.
I'm willing to date. Anyway, so I didn't notice anything else in the room, but I noticed the books.
Yeah, medicine cabinets don't matter. That doesn't tell you nothing. The bookshelf tells you everything.
How can I miss all the other things in this room? But I was beeline for the bookshelf.
And did you discover anything interesting? I have to know now.
We're not a good match.
See, it's better than anything you could ever do,
His books were from his teenage years. I'm like, really? You haven't gotten new books since then? Yeah.
Well, see, there's not only in dog-eared and highlighted pages, you can find red flags in those bookshelves.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. Again, for all of your knowledge, I'm so excited to read this first one. When does so the first book in this series is already out.
The first book in the series, Magic, Mystery, and the Multiverse, the marvelous Multiverse app, is out. It's available on Amazon. It's available, anywhere books are sold. It's available wide right now. And then the second book, which is called The Secret Multiverse Academy, will be launched on Kickstarter in April, fingers crossed. And then it'll be available in bookstores, a few months after that. The other thing about Kickstarter is you give people an exclusive window. And then the third book is called The Deadly Asphyxiator. And that will also come out this year, but I'll do a separate Kickstarter for that. Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's exciting for people to know, because if it's a trilogy, you get sometimes people are like, how many years do I need to wait? So I'm glad they're all coming out in this year.
I have already written the other 2 books. I'm just editing them and polishing them and, getting character art done. So yeah, they're already written. You will get them this year, 2024.
You don't have to wait. It's like if I find that that's like the new culture, and I'm like, if there's one thing I could cancel, it's like, can we not have to wait like really long? I get really into something and they're like, we'll see you in 2 years. And I'm like, what? No.
Oh, I don't know. If you read fantasy, I love the author Patrick Rothfuss, but he's wrote 2 books in a trilogy, and the third book, it's been 20 years, I think, and we still don't have it.
And you're like, what? Yeah, there you go. That maybe something something you need to ghostwrite, maybe help him finish that.
Maybe
we'll have to collaborate on that.
Oh, okay, Tanya, sounds good. Well, such a pleasure connecting with you. Really enjoy chatting with you. You've got such a bubbly energy, and I loved your story about even a prostitute is a professional. I'll remember.
I know. If anything's going to get stuck on a t-shirt with my face on it, it's going to end up being that. But that is the way my world works, and I'm okay with it.
Okay, and just to wrap this up with a 90-day challenge for all the
Yes.
listeners, they want to improve their communication skills. I give them this 90-day challenge, and I guarantee if you do it, it will definitely improve your communication. So every day, read. Could be for 5 minutes. Read every day. Every day, write. Again, it could be for 5 minutes. It could be just a little bit in a journal. And then once a week, review what you have written in your journal and review what did you learn from what you're reading. And if you do that for 90 days, you will be amazed what you notice about your life that's not working, that you're maybe tolerating, that you could take action on. And you'll notice things that are drawing you forward, that maybe you're in your comfort zone and you haven't been listening to, but they will call you forward if you give them the space of reading, writing, and then reviewing once a week. So that's my 90-day challenge. Let me know if you do it.
Okay. Well, when this goes out, I'm going to put a timer clock somewhere, and we're going to see,
all right.
see who does it and see what changes they make. Because I love a challenge myself. So thank you for that one.
It sounds good, Tanya.
Well, Aurora and I are even because her new book I haven't read, and she's going to read mine. I get so excited sending books in the mail because often we don't get that. So I do encourage you. I'm going to have the links of where you can get Turn Words into Wealth, as well as Magic, Mystery, and the Multiverse, the first one that is coming out. I'm excited. I have ordered my copy already, so I can't wait for that to come in and give it a read. I loved Aurora's nonfiction writing. I'm sure I'm going to love her fiction writing just as much. But one of the things that I hope you took away from this episode in particular was learning and just knowing in the pit of your soul that pivoting can happen at any time you want. You are never too old to start something or do something. As Aurora said, she was 50 when she decided an MBA would be a good idea. Writing a fiction book. It just doesn't matter. The right time is when it strikes passion into you. That's the right time. And sometimes a project can only take a week, and sometimes these ideas take years to be able to go. But you never get it finished if you never start. And as I had quoted, it is one of my favorite ones. It is literally, if you're watching the video, on a sticky note, which you can't see because the lighting is shit, on my desk. There will always be someone who cannot see your worth. Never let that person be you. And no matter what it is that you're doing today, make sure you do two things. One, head over to our website, check out this episode, all of the links of everywhere that you can follow Aurora. If you have ever thought about writing a book, or that it would even be neat to, she is somebody who's going to be able to take you from beginning to end in that process. So go check that out. And the second thing is the thing that I say at the end of every single show, and always will say, no matter what you're doing, make sure you take time to have fun. Because as I always say, if you're not having fun, why are you doing it?